Welcome to Finders Keepers, the vodcast powered by Asset Find. Here, we talk with the people shaping the future of global financial asset recovery, from industry veterans to technology innovators. Each episode uncovers new insights, real-world challenges, and the emerging tools helping companies locate and recover billions in unclaimed financial assets worldwide. If it touches finance, data, or discovery, we're talking about it here. This is Finders Keepers, where every conversation uncovers something worth finding. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Finders Keepers, and it is called A State of Mind. Now, nobody wants to talk about death, and yet at some point, every single one of us will have to. What happens after we lose someone we love is already one of the hardest experiences a person can go through. And for just far too many families, the weight of estate administration just makes it even harder. But if there's a way to ease even a fraction of that pain, it's worth talking about. And that's exactly why today's guest is here. I am joined by Davis Wilkinson, co-founder and CEO of Heirloom, which is a platform that simplifies estate settlement for grieving families. Now, before building Heirloom, Davis was on the founding team of Data Fleets, which was acquired in 2022 and holds an AB, also known as a BA in economics, from a little-known place called Harvard. Davis, welcome to Finders Keepers.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm grateful you made the time for Heirloom and me, and this will be a nice conversation.
I know that it will. And so let's start with, you quit big tech to work a reception desk at a funeral home. So what did you experience during your time there that made you think, this industry really requires the services and support of a firm like Heirloom?
Well, so the origin story of Heirloom came before the funeral home. I had a brother who had passed away. I saw my mother, thank you. I saw my mother go through estate settlement, and I reasoned, wow, this is way too hard, and people in the midst of grief and mourning shouldn't have to go through this alone.
Right.
But the truth is, I didn't know very much about the death industry, for lack of a better term. I didn't understand the customer journey all that well. And so that's why I joined the funeral home as a receptionist, to learn more about that. And candidly, I also wondered if they could be a channel partner to a company like Heirloom. So to your question about what did I learn? What did I see? I met a lot of amazing people. If you ever have a chance to spend time with funeral directors, they are incredible. What they do all day, every day, comforting those in mourning. It's a really special trade profession. What I learned about the families is grief. Man, there's so many things to say. One of the things I think grief does is it kind of shuts our brains off a little. There's so much cognitive load that's happening with these emotions, these feelings flooding through our systems. Our conscious and unconscious minds are going through haywire, they're in haywire. And all of a sudden, when you have to work on something like probate, that just adds to the cognitive load. And when your brain doesn't work, it's really hard to manage life, manage a job, and then manage this new legal system called probate on top of it.
Right. So you touched on a lot of things there. It is something, you don't think about too much about the job of those funeral directors and having to sort of, remain calm and uplift families during the most, difficult time of their lives. It does take a really, special person, I can imagine. And kudos to you as well for sort of inserting yourself really at that level, at the ground level, to understand really what, the industry was about. And I'm sure that really has served you in Heirloom, as a result. So you have these families that are grieving, they're upset, they're stressed out. How common is it that, these estates are not managed well because they're just, drowning in paperwork? And what are the consequences if they aren't?
I don't mean to assess blame. Life is hard, probate is hard, but it's near ubiquitous that things go wrong.
Right.
It can be as harmless as accidentally filling out a probate form incorrectly.
Right.
It can be as emotional as family conflict. you don't really know someone until you have to share an inheritance with them, is a common saying.
Right, absolutely.
Or there can be financial impacts. One which is topical today, is unclaimed assets being left on the table, and folks, not maximizing the value of their inheritance because they don't find all the assets that their loved one had left behind for them.
So, walk us through exactly how Heirloom supports the grieving family. So, from the moment that someone loses a loved one, what does that journey look like with Heirloom by their side? And how emotionally challenging and legally complex is the process of managing the estate of a deceased loved one? I think people probably undermine or underestimate the labyrinth. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I'll answer your questions back to front. So, how complicated is this? I would say the honest answer is it depends. It's always harder than you'd expect,
Right.
depending on the nature of the estate, depending on the family and the assets, and also the jurisdiction. There's wide variability in the amount of labor involved. Just to give you some quick numbers, on average, probate can take at least over 100 hours of someone's time. And by
Wow.
the way, I'm using the term probate loosely here. It
Right.
can be a legalistic thing where you actually go through formal probate with the courts. It can
Right.
also be just estate settlement generally. You're
Okay.
looking at 100 hours more commonly. I speak with people who hadn't used Heirloom, where it's 400, 500 hours is not out of the question, can take 12, 18 months or longer, can cost many thousands of dollars. So it is basically you're moonlighting a second job on top of grieving a loved one and having a normal job. To your first question, how does Heirloom help? So you can think of us as the TurboTax of probate. So we have self-help tools, personalized guides, step-by-step instructions and software. And then we have a managed service where we can say, hey, executor, hey, family, we're going to take this whole thing off your plate and we'll just come to you with big questions and we'll do the legwork. On average, we'd like to estimate that we're saving people 80% of the hours with managed service or more. So think about saving hundreds of hours for families where instead of working on admin, they're now with their loved ones, they're grieving, they're healing, they're doing, in my view, what matters most.
Those are some very impressive numbers, and again, it can seem sort of like a win on both sides in terms of alleviating their grief and just making the process so much more efficient. Now, you talked about unclaimed assets a bit. So your website indicates that 96% of estates have unclaimed assets, and we at Asset Find would agree with that estimate. Among all the legal and administrative responsibilities of an executor, how important is the location recovery of unclaimed financial assets of, the deceased for the beneficiaries?
It's critical. It is foundational. So I'll take a step back for folks who perhaps don't know. When you're an estate executor, one of your jobs is you need to create a snapshot of the estate from a financial perspective, like a balance sheet of the estate. And so what that implies is you have to go out and find all the different assets and liabilities that your loved one had. And that's actually harder than you might ever expect. You might know offhand an example I commonly get, say, your parents pass away. You might know they banked with, say, I don't know, Wells Fargo,
Right,
and they had Schwab as a broker, but you
right,
don't actually know all the different pieces of their financial life because
right.
it's private and also people just have money in a lot of different places. But you don't want to leave the money on the table. So what Heirloom does is we search over 100 billion public records. We search over 6,000 different data sources. We're partnering with credit bureaus, all of these other sorts of data vendors to be able to create that snapshot of the estate in the blink of an eye, so to speak. So instead of spending months trying to find these assets, you can do it in minutes, as they say. Your point on unclaimed assets, that's just one of the types of assets that people are looking for as executors.
Right.
And as I mentioned, it's critical. And I'll go for maybe 60 seconds longer if that's okay.
Excellent.
Um, okay, so I spoke with saw an executor who hadn't used Heirloom or Asset Find a few months ago, who was searching through their parents' closets, and they encountered a life insurance policy worth over $1 million they had no idea existed. And if they hadn't gotten lucky, they would never have known this life insurance policy was meant for them. 1 in 4 life insurance policies go unclaimed. I was speaking with someone the other day who we were looking through some unclaimed property databases. There's an individual with $8 million of unclaimed property just sitting there, and I think experts estimate about 2 trillion of the $100 trillion that are going to be transferred across generations in the next 15 years. It's going to go unclaimed, and if you think about it, wow, that's life changing money for so many American families that's just sitting there. And that's why tools like Asset Find, I think, exist and need to exist to help families maximize the legacy of their loved ones.
Yeah, that's a shocking number that you said in your particular case, where they found it sort of went in the closet, and that's a large amount. But I think just that use case is not that unusual. And I think one of the things that a lot of people don't know, and I'm sure that you experience, is that oftentimes the executors of the estates are inexperienced and really don't know how to navigate the journey. And so I can appreciate that any help that they can get, that's not their full-time job in some respects, and it's just sort of out of their realm of understanding. Is that what you're seeing as well?
That's well said. People are smart. Executors commonly are the responsible ones in the family.
Right.
Their parents choose to administer an estate. Even still, doesn't matter how smart you are, if you're in the midst of grief, if you're busy, if you're unfamiliar with these processes, you don't have the time, you don't have the energy, you don't have the attention to really do it right commonly. And that's where I just think what Asset Find is building is incredible. I do think you have the opportunity to change millions of Americans and Canadians and other families' lives as you, as a sort of a matchmaker, match families with assets that are outstanding.
Yeah, I think we both can get excited about the mission that we're on to ultimately reunite lost financial assets with either the individual or the corporation. That lost sight of those assets. It's a good feeling to know that they can be reunited. So in the case of the loss of loved ones, can you think of anything that individuals can do in advance proactively prior to their death to make the process for those executors and the beneficiaries just that much easier?
Yes, the answer is simple. Create a will. If it makes sense for your family, create a trust. So in America, at least, I don't know the data on Canada, but in America, 60% of Americans die intestate or without a will, which makes the process so much harder for their families. I mean, the truth is, nobody wants to think about death.
Right.
And so I think that is actually what causes people to not create wills, that, and it can be expensive, but I would recommend it. That said, wills and trusts are commonly not up to date when someone passes away. So there's always going to be an opportunity for Heirloom or Asset Find to come in and help find things that may have fallen through the cracks. And, we've listed big numbers, $8 million, $1 million for perhaps wealthier families. But the truth is, even for middle class, lower class or less fortunate families, there is meaningful money to be found to foster a better life for inheritors, beneficiaries, but also to honor the legacy of those who have passed.
I was shocked by 60% do not. I mean, it's surprising and it's not, because I think, as what we said in the beginning, it's a topic people don't necessarily want to talk about, but it's something that you have to talk about. And the more prepared you are, the better it is for everybody around you, when that time comes. Now, I can imagine in your time at Heirloom, you've had some pretty interesting stories. You talked about one earlier on. Can you think of any other stories that either really touched you on a personal, emotional level, or the sheer dollar amount that you were able to, get back, for them was meaningful?
I'll share two stories. One is on the more emotional side, and the second is financial. It's not a massive number, but I think modesty has its own value.
All relative, right? It's all relative. Yeah.
So the first story, we're working with an executor in Washington State whose niece passed away, and as I think, a matter of service and as a gift to the family, the decedent's aunt is taking on the executor role,
Right.
and she's a mother. She runs an insurance practice. I don't want to give away too many details for privacy reasons, but
Right.
it's and she's doing the managed service with Heirloom, and it really has just it's meant a lot to get to know this family and to be able to be an advisor to them navigating this experience. Disclaimer: Heirloom, we're not lawyers, we're not offering legal advice, but we're offering process advice for
Right.
perhaps the way we can call it. And I don't know. There was a moment, I think it's okay to share this, where I cried and I think she cried, where we had a chance to just talk about her niece who had passed. And to me, that's a microcosm, or it's an illustration of our value proposition, where we're in the business of burden relief. Our systems, our services, our automations handle the administration in the back end, and then I get to talk with this family on the front end and mourn a loved one and celebrate the wonderful, like truly amazing life this young woman lived. And then on the financial side, this is a more recent example. I actually don't know what the final dollar of value amount will be, but there was a roofer in Chicago who his mother had passed away, and he truly was, I think, selfless in his motivation, where he just wanted to honor her legacy, but she had dementia and Alzheimer's. And so he had heard stories from her about perhaps life insurance policies she had purchased and other sorts of assets she had, but it's hard to know if what someone is saying who has
Right.
Alzheimer's is true. I
Right.
want to say it gently, but it's the truth.
Right.
And so
Sure.
he worked with Heirloom to discover all sorts of assets, and we found a life insurance policy for her granddaughter, his niece, actually. So a few nieces in these examples I'm
Right.
giving, and it meant a lot to help a family who just wanted to honor the legacy of a grandmother and a mother who they truly appeared. They just love her, and they wanted to honor her wishes. That's the language they've used with me again and again. So there's two anecdotes for you.
Lovely, lovely anecdotes, and two things stuck with me. First of all, I really like your term. You're in the business of burden relief. I think that's a really interesting way to talk about it. And I think when you talk about the services of Heirloom, you're sort of saying that you're not on the legal side, but what came to mind was you're almost, I think, quasi therapists in the process as well.
So it's funny. Can I say yes and
Yes,
it's
yeah,
my favorite part of my job when I'm interacting with customers, and I like my team a lot too. But we are a technology company,
right,
and so the reason why we can offer our services at affordable rates relative to I don't want to speak negatively of peers, relatively to existing services, is because we automate so much of what we do on the back end. Automated asset discovery capabilities, automated communication, all these sorts of things. So yes, we are therapists, but we're technologists as well.
well, you know what? They are not mutually exclusive, so it's okay for them to be talked about in the same sentence.
Yep.
Um, so you talked about it a bit earlier, the generational wealth transfer. So, depending on the article you read, there's close to $100 trillion it's going to be transferred globally, and 84 trillion of that is in the United States alone over the next 20 years. Talk to me how that plays into Heirloom and, where you're going in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I'm going to take a different approach with this and talk about fraud, um,
Okay.
and why probate exists. So I probate is not the bad guy. The reason why probate processes have existed in civilizations for, this might sound like an exaggeration, hundreds of generations is
Right.
because of fraud prevention. It is an ugly truth that theft happens a lot. with inheritances.
Mhm.
And so probate courts are put in place to ensure the wishes of a decedent, either outlaid in a will or in regulatory policies, are carried out legally and honestly. But unfortunately, and this is not assessing blame, still a lot of fraud still happens. And when you think about the magnitude of 84 trillion in the US, 100 trillion across other countries
Right.
comprehensively, what can Heirloom do to help prevent fraud? There are
Right.
simple things we can do. When we bring on a client, we will notify credit bureaus, we will notify the Social Security Administration, things of that nature to ensure that it's called ghosting in the industry, fraud of decedents. The risk of that is minimized, but we're constantly thinking, hey, how can we help prevent fraud in other ways as we work with our professional partners. By the way, we're partnering with estate attorneys, professional fiduciaries, professional executors, the prospect of partnering with financial advisors to be incorporated throughout all these different professional services industries to ensure we do this right comprehensively as a team, working together to prevent fraud in probate processes.
Great angle, and one I hadn't sort of thought of. And it makes so much sense because it's so prevalent and becoming even more so. And when you're talking about dollar amounts of that magnitude, it's amazing what people will do to try and get access, to that, unfortunately. And so to be able to get ahead of that and put the guardrails in place, I think will be critical in ensuring that this wealth is transferred to those loved ones that should be, receiving it without issue and without stress and complication. So looking ahead 10 years from now, where's Heirloom and how do you plan to get where you want to go?
We have a simple mission. Our mission is to help comfort those who mourn by streamlining estate settlements so executors have time and space to grieve. And so I'll answer your question deliberately vaguely. My hope is that we fulfill that mission in whichever way is most impactful. Right now, we have the TurboTax approach, self help tools, and managed service. What form that takes with the advent of AI and automation, our growing list of partners across the banking, financial, and legal systems, time will tell. I don't know. I will say, shameless plug, I hope that Asset Find is a big part of our story. Uh, what Heirloom wants to do, what we do, we can't do it alone. We have partners across the industry, and I'm quite bullish on the impact you all will make. What you're doing is pro social, it is good, and looking for good partners in the industry to work arm in arm, shoulder and to shoulder with as we solve this problem.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And we couldn't agree more. And we too believe at Asset Find in building great partnerships. We're all in this together, and I think what's so exciting about this industry is that ultimately we really are doing good by our clients, so to speak. And so it's exciting when that reunification happens. And I always sort of call it a win-win. And I think Davis, having you on today has just been such a breath of fresh air. And I think you're a perfect example of somebody who can have sort of that vision and goal in technology, but also do it with compassion and integrity. And we'd like to think that, we align with those values as well at Asset Find. And so it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Until next time.
Take care.